Hello and welcome to In Search of Purpose with Sal Hanvey. Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. I'm Sal Hanvey, In Search of Purpose. And this week I have the pleasure to introduce to you Laurence Harvey. Hello, Larry.
Hi, Sal. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. What about you? What are you up to today?
I am actually working on a few projects at home because I'm one of the very lucky people that have a little workshop at home, so I can delve into my man cave.
Oh, lovely. Any excuse for a man to go to his man cave doesn't really need an excuse, nor a pandemic.
Yeah, I'm well away from that. I'm in deepest, darkest Essex. Yeah.
So where did you grow up, Laurence? Tell us a wee bit about where you grew up first.
Where did I grow up? I grew up in the Midlands, actually.
Oh, right.
Yeah, in a place called Bewdley and Stourport.
And,
Yeah.
and how long did you live there?
I lived there until I could quite legitimately escape, which was 17. Yeah.
Too small for you, was it?
It was very parochial, yes, yeah. And the world was waiting, and I couldn't wait to jump feet first into it, absolutely.
And where did you go?
I went to Hereford College of Art and Design, and I did a 2-year course there, BTEC course, which was a course which is like a year's foundation and then a year's BTEC qualification, and that sort of is like a 2 years foundation course for going on to art college. And then I went on to West Surrey College of Art and Design for 4 years and got my degree. And then I went freelance straight after that as well. And then I managed to get a job at a really weird place called Tetra Design Services.
Okay.
And it was an architectural modeller's. And I include that because it's a weird way into my film industry, because I did that for about over a year. And then I answered an ad in The Guardian, and because they were looking for an armourer over at the National Theatre, and I managed to get it, and they gave me the job. As silly as that sounds, those days you could do that. And I spent 13 very happy years at the National Theatre in charge of their weapons and special effects.
I didn't actually know that. I didn't know that at all, how you started out doing that. For 13 years in the National Theatre. That's amazing.
Yeah. So I've done over 250 National Theatre and West End productions. And then I decided in 2000 to call it a day for various reasons. But I think it was, I always say, one King Lear too many. I then got a job. I went round, actually, I spent 3 months sort of hunting around the supervisors at the time and talking to them and seeing, putting my toe in the water in terms of going into the film industry. And I got rejected for it, was for Harry Potter. And then I got a call from Robbie Scott saying, we've just had a look at your CV, and we saw that you went to Tetra Design Services. This is why I mention it. 14 years previously, which then was seen as a sort of, the academy for doing model making. It was like, if you'd worked at Tetra, then obviously, that you came with a pedigree of some sort of, making pedigree. So I had an in, and straight away I started on Harry Potter 1. and I haven't really looked back since. And I've been doing that now for the last 19 years, film. So
tell us a bit about exactly what it is that you do and how you contribute to the film industry in that way. Use Harry Potter as an example, if you don't mind, for all those Harry Potter fans out there.
Well, for the Harry Potter fans, it was a massive, massive model build. I mean, fair play to Robbie Scott, who's actually, a top class technician. And I started again, basically. I was a senior tech over at the, National Theatre, and obviously, a sort of middle management. But then I started again when I went back into the film game. And this time it was as a modeler, I didn't really care at the time. And then we were working sort of under the VFX sort of banner.
Which is visual effects, for those who don't know.
Yeah, visual effects, yeah. And then we were making loads of models. There was I was working on Hogwarts. So we made this model of Hogwarts. And
so
I did
cool. So cool.
Yeah, and I did the staircase model, and I can still remember there was 1,980 paintings on that staircase, and I know there was 1,980 paintings because I put all of them together and hung them on that staircase.
All 1,980 of them.
That's it. It was a porter cabin full of probably around about 6 inches by, I don't know, 4-inch pictures. Yeah.
Well, without giving away my age, I would remember that because that was the year I was born.
Oh my God. You've just given the game away, by the way. And that was in 2000, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. Very good, like what you did there. So that's how you got started. How exciting. And did you work on any, forgive me for, Harry Potter fans will probably be a bit sort of disappointed in my lack of knowledge, but did you work on Narnia or anything like that?
No. I ended up working for another little company with Paul Dunn. He was the other supervisor I worked for after that. And I went and did Charlotte Gray, was the sort of second project that I think I worked on. It's all there on IMDb, folks. You're asking about.
Yeah, but people want to hear your story, not just look at your titles.
I know. It's just it's so long ago. You've got to try and remember the chronological order that you actually were.
Brilliant, Larry.
But, but I think when you first start, you end up doing a lot of small periods of jobs. There's sort of I was lucky in the sense that I started as a technician, and I was able to do all these jobs and prove myself over time. And then I wanted to push. I sat there once when I had a hernia, and I watched a program about this. Actually prompted me to go into the film industry when I was at the National, because I'd had a hernia, and there was a program about the making of James Bond. They got this guy chap, Mr. Corbould, and he was being interviewed for the Bond. And I thought, oh, that'd be great. I'd love to do that sort of thing. And lo and behold, less than a year later or so, I actually managed to get a job on Die Another Day as an engineer, because I was coded. I was actually, I could weld pretty well,
Amazing, yeah. So what year was that then?
Sorry, this was, I think, around about 2002.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was getting on for around about that. I can't.
James Bond, Die Another Day. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. But it was everybody's dream job. I mean, actually, that Bond was my complete dream job, because I got a job doing the Bond cars in the sort of in the car unit, and then when that finished, I managed to, I was also freelancing because I was still an armourer. Well, I still am one, really. I was freelancing for a company called Baptist. And as soon as I finished that, I got to, do a few weeks or whatever the case may be on Die Another Day with the weapons. So, I mean, that is, for me, a Bond. There's nothing, there's nothing more that you want to work on than cars and guns, really.
Amazing. So you had a really, really good experience doing that, and you did that for a few weeks.
Yeah. So that was really cool. So I sort of, it was quite funny. You go into work in the morning, and they're fixing the axles on the car and various. And they go, "Hey, Sam, yeah. So, did you watch the Bond last night?" So it's the irony. So I think I spent the first couple of weeks with my sort of dust mask on and my PPE going.
I'm sure you did.
I was quite, I was young and stupid. Now I'm just old and stupid. So
no. If you weren't excited about doing something like that, there would be something wrong. It would show.
Oh yeah. That was, yeah, totally. But I think, over a period of time, I actually prefer, and I think a lot of people agree with me on this, as technicians, to work on smaller projects. I think smaller projects are much more sort of very theatre-like. You get to know everybody. If you're in a big project, you are restricted in the information that you've got. Your job is very narrow. And you don't get a broad picture or a bigger overview of what you're working on. So I preferred working on the smaller projects, or smaller films.
Especially if you had the theatre background, having done West End, because, just to explain to people a wee bit about what you did there, you obviously did a lot of explosions on stage and fire.
Yeah, I did an awful lot of pyro on stage and an awful lot of weapon work. And occasionally I used to have to get dressed up and go on set, actually on stage and perform. Yeah. And that was a bit mad. And what you do is you go through the weapons with people and you set up a props table with the weapons. They have the National works around about 3 months in advance. So just to give you an idea of how busy I was during the year, you would have the season would properly start, let's say on a calendar basis, say for January, you'll be working 3 months in advance on any project. Now we've got 3 theatres at the National Theatre: the Lyttelton, Cottesloe, I think it's changed its name now, but I can't tell you what it is, and the Olivier. So the Olivier is the largest, the Lyttelton's the next largest, and the Cottesloe's the smallest. But you could be working on 18 to 21 shows a year. And you've got 3 theatres, and you've got, in those theatres, you'd have what's called a rep. So you could have 3 shows at any one time in those 3 theatres. So you could have up to 9 to 10 shows showing in 1 week. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So during the day, you'd be working either repairing stuff that had been broken the night before, because every day you get a stage manager's report. So the first thing you do once you sit down with your cup of coffee in the morning is go through the stage management's reports and see if there's anything that needs repairing, anything that needs sorting out, blah, blah, blah. And then you would construct your day to do the next set of making for X, Y, and Z show. Mm-hmm. And you'd be rolling through all the time. So I had a large metal workshop down the bottom, and I had the armoury at the top on a sort of mezzanine type level. And there was myself and Tony. We used to be there permanently, and we used to get the odd freelancer in when it got really busy, and it was great. It was totally autonomous. You couldn't get in there. It was locked.
That is
It
brilliant.
was like having my own little world, you know, the
It is,
National
it's good
Theatre.
because it's such a unique job, and
Yeah.
it's not that it's undervalued. It's just it's not understood, in the sense that it's if it wasn't for you, it wouldn't be the magic. You're there to contribute to help create the magic behind
Yeah.
what's going on, and it's that kind of thing where it's a very specific, detailed, unique skill that you have.
Oh,
Without
it is.
believing.
I mean, you have to know the sort of broad range. That's the thing about what they don't sort of say about armoury, is that you have to know the broad range of weapons from the sort of, before medieval times right the way through to modern
And
times.
you know all about armory
Yeah,
too
yeah, yeah,
well.
yeah. Rapiers and God knows what. And then you work with all the fight directors, and you make all the weapons for them, and you create the show. And then the difference between theatre and television and film is that you have 3 weeks of rehearsals on average. Well, we used to have 3 weeks. You sit in rehearsals for. Sorry, I'll go back. They'd have the rehearsals with the actors in terms of getting the show together. So you could sit in with those rehearsals on occasion if they've got fights or they've got certain sequences that involved you and your department. And then they would have technical rehearsals, which is time on stage.
Mm-hmm.
And that would generally be around about a week, maybe 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where you'd be in the theatre every day, just making sure that everything was okay. And you'd have, from those rehearsals, you'd have to take what we call, it's called the Bible. The stage management have to cue in everything. That's your lighting cues, your sound cues, your crew, or the actual main crew that move the furniture, and the stage crew, and then you would be part of those cueings. Yeah, so you'd wear a radio at the time, and then you'd have a little box with two lights, one green light, one red light, and you come up. They go stage left, Laurence, and blah blah blah. Cue 45 and go, and then you'd be given a flambeau, or you'd be giving the actor a weapon before, which was loaded, blah blah blah, and then they go on stage, do their thing, and then you'd retrieve it afterwards. Yeah, and it's scary stuff. Trust me. When that train leaves the station, you are on it. And I think what they used to do is the first dress rehearsal, and then they do a second dress rehearsal with an audience. So for about a week, you'd have these dress rehearsals with audiences.
Mm-hmm.
But the first one would be in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
So it was manic. You can imagine the adrenaline level on every single department. That's costume, hair and makeup, all the crew, all the, technical staff.
Mm-hmm.
They've got to be on it, and they've got to try and remember what they were learning about 3-4 weeks ago. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So, that's, even though you might know the script, you've got to know where that actor is, where they're coming in from, when that cue is, when that time is, what line they're going to work, what line you've got to fire the gun on, or whatever, a bit of sound effect, whatever the case may be. So I even did for Sir Ralph Richardson on the Cottesloe. I think it was a seagull, I can't remember, but I had to do an understage fart with a whoopee cushion, and that had to be on cue, And there was a very funny one called for Mackinac, where this really freaked me out. It was an execution, and she'd in the story in the 1930s, she'd murdered her husband, and she goes for the electric chair, and they do the lot. They've got the journalist there, they've got the guy that shaves her head, they've got the priest there, and you're there with this carbon arc machine, which throws this huge amount of light, and you can see you're sat down in the bottom of the well in by the stage, and you can see up to the stage where they're sitting her in the chair, shaving her hair, putting her in this lecture chair, strapping her in, doing the whole thing, giving her last rites. And then the cue light is in front of you, and you feel, I'm not kidding, you feel for all the world that you are the executioner. And I used to go away from that show actually sort of like completely buzzing, you know, as if I'd actually killed somebody. It was just the weirdest, and I've killed everybody in every single which way in this job, you know. But that was one of the weirdest ones. It was like, oh my God. Yeah.
Do you think that that's maybe why you like the smaller jobs, because of that connection on a level that isn't so narrow?
Well, it's more involved. You are more involved. You're a bigger part of the picture. Do you see what I mean? Your input is larger, and the input to you's larger. So you there's a greater level of understanding, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Sorry, it's, on the larger shows, on
yeah.
the larger pictures, it's very departmentalized.
Yeah.
You know, and it's very structured. So it's very hard to have that information unless you actually push really hard for it, you know.
Yeah, well, we'll get to those wee bits and pieces in a minute, definitely. Just working through your IMDb archive. Right? So tell us a bit about what happened then after the Bond. Anything else exciting happening then just after that?
Oh, yeah. Then I got a really good job on, which was, again, a phone call from Robbie saying, can you make a shanty town? And of course, rule one of the film game is go, yeah. Little did I know that this was for Batman Begins, and
amazing. I did not know this either. You are honestly a dark horse.
Yeah, this was Batman Begins, and it was what we called LaSalle Street, and I started the job, and it was just they hadn't got the information in properly yet, and eventually, after a couple of weeks, the drawings, or the first drawing, came through, which was for Gotham City Bank. Now it's a model. Now it's I think it's 1/6 scale. It's the same size as an Action Man, a person.
Okay.
So this building came in, okay, and I'll give you an idea of the scale of this build. This is where it really hit home. Each of these buildings were 54 feet high by 24 feet wide by 14 feet deep. Yeah. There were 8 buildings, 8 of these skyscraper buildings with beautiful details. You know, that beautiful American Gothic, Art Deco-y type detailings. And the drawings started coming in. And to give you an idea of not just scale, so it was not, I think 8 of these buildings, the bank building had to float out. It was all built 9 foot off the ground, as if that was the ground level. And the reason they could do that is they could take out the bank building, get underneath, and they could look up with the camera.
Yes.
Do you see what I mean? So if it had been built on the ground, there's no way you could sort of get those fantastic sort of panoramic type views. So this LaSalle Street had, you'll all remember it on Batman Begins, it's where the monorail, they have the fight on the monorail, it starts collapsing, it goes into what's called the glass building and smashes out, and then it goes into what they call the station building, crashes, the train comes off, crashes through the station building, and then crashes into the underground car park below. So just the footprint for this set is 85 feet long. It's massive. It's 54 feet high. I can remember this because it's imprinted on my brain. There's over 3,500 sash windows to be made. Yeah.
People don't think of those things. People do not think of those things.
No. no, they don't. And I was very lucky. I had 82 people working for me,
That's handy.
and every day I went through. I'm pretty sure I contacted all 82 of those people every single day. My mornings were spent going around, making sure that they got the information, what they needed, and all the stuff, the materials and stuff that they needed were delivered to them when they needed them. When I first started the job, I won't lie, I took myself off to the toilet a few times and had a big strong word for myself, because this was ginormous. It was the biggest model build in the history of movie.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Well, I mean, them trying to get the scale, you know, when you're saying about this amount of feet, that amount of feet, this amount of windows.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not
So,
quantifiable in my mind.
yeah, well, I think what Tetra design had taught me, and what working on with Robbie on Harry Potter had taught me, I was able to put all that into operation and use that system and produce it. So the way I did it was to break it down into its smallest common denominators. This may sound a bit weird, but you look at a building, you look at the details. I had a team of about 4 or 5 sculptors. They were the real sort of really high skilled modelers, you know, and they would make all the details for me. Okay, so all the cornicing that goes around the buildings, I would detail out and give those to the plasterers, and then they'd make lengths of this stuff. If there was any particular detail that went into the cornicing, the sculptors would make it, and then once they've got a particular detail, then they would mold it, and then remold it, and then remold it until it was, you know, X, Y, and Z, you know, 25 feet long, or whatever the case may be. And then they could remold that to make up the whole unit. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So I broke every single element of the buildings down into their common denominator. And then I coded them. So every single building I set up this code for. So I knew exactly what detail, what code, and what I had to do. And every single week, Warner Brothers would come in, they'd photograph. I'd go around with them on a Thursday, and we photograph every single piece of work that had been produced that week. And then that would be sent off to Warner Brothers, you know, for them. And every single week I'd write a report about what had been made, what needs to be made, and what was going to be, you know, what was going to be finished by this such and such a date. Yeah. And so I'm going to give you a question. How long do you think they gave me to do it?
Well, you'd like to think they give you about 20 years, but they probably give you 8 weeks.
It's the right answer. 8 weeks. I nearly cacked myself. The only saving grace for that job was the fact that once we were in for about a 6-week period, we were getting into the point where the build would come in, and we have to put it in this. It was in the George Lucas stage over at Elstree Studios, and then once that came in, then obviously we had to get scaffolders and riggers to come in to set all this stuff up. So they had to set the platform up, they had to do all this pieces. So that was fine. And the saving grace for me was that they took one look at the job when it was ready to be done, installed, and they said, that's going to take us 8 weeks to put in. So I got another 8 weeks.
Thank goodness for that.
You might think that was your saving grace. It was in one sense, but it was also a poison chalice, because in that 8 weeks, I had to make another identical size set, which was the underground car park. So, and we had to make model cars, 1/6 scale, and you can't, there's only a couple that I think were on the market that you could actually buy. So it was just mental.
It sounds
And you think every single thing had to be made for that street. Every single thing, the neon lights, the
traffic cones,
everything, that from the sort of the rubbish on the floor, to the newspaper stands, to the telephone kiosks, to the everything, just everything, just the metalwork, because they were copying the base part of it. The first floor was made at Cardington in real scale, obviously because it was Batman. And at Cardington, if you've ever been there, that's where they built the airships, and it's just, you've never seen anything so big in your life. But there's an awful lot of metalwork in Cardington to hold this structure up. And they use that Batman Begins as part of the roadway. You know, you drive through the structure, and we had to reproduce that in 1/6 scale. Just that piece of work alone was sent out to another company who made a beautiful job in aluminium, and with all the rivets and all the bits and pieces. And that was £40,000 just on its own. So I have no idea how much this thing cost. It probably. Yeah, it has to be a good £500,000
least,
minimum.
I would say.
Yeah,
That's
great. Yeah. So it was a mental job, and it was 7 days a week, and it lasted for a long, long time. You know. Yeah.
And that was the Batman Begins, and then journey us on to the next destination platform.
Well, the journeys onto the next was going back into what we call action films, really. With Paul, I went and did a Seed of Chucky film in Romania.
No, that's one of my favourites growing up. I loved it. Chucky, I loved all Chucky movies. I'll tell you now, when my mum and dad, when I was growing up, my mum and dad, we owned an independent video store in the 1980s. And I was so excited because I always got to see pre-releases. I always got to stay up late and watch things I probably shouldn't have been watching. You know, but a long time's went past now. It's all right. But my brothers, I grew up with 2 older brothers in a house, so you've seen a lot of action movies, you've seen a lot of horror movies, you've probably seen way too much too young, okay? And I can remember the promo stuff that used to come with the videos into the independent video store, which I've told a few people before. I'm really excited to have shared that experience with Quentin Tarantino, because apparently his parents owned an independent video store in the 80s.
Fantastic.
That little window of time that they were there before the multis, like, you know, Blockbuster and Extravision and stuff came in. But my mum and dad used to kind of give us the posters that used to come, a bit of like the merch, you know, that came with the videos. And I got to see the Chucky poster and Chucky poster. And I had them up on my wall in my bedroom, like, you know, some people have Rainbow Bright and Care Bears. I had like the Seed of Chucky. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And literally these posters on my wall, my friends would come in and go, okay.
For a little crew gift, I went down to the local shop in Romania, which is where we got all the knives from, Seed of Chucky knives, and then I'd make lightweight versions. But we actually got these carving knives, and so I blunted them all, and I got Don Mancini, who was the director, to sign them, and I handed them out on a big block. I just shoved them in a big block and handed them out as presents. So,
lovely.
You know, so I might have 1 or 2 of those, knocking about still. But.
At which point I often say, you mean it wasn't real? I always say.
It was so funny. You've never seen it. There's a couple of stories that I've got for Chucky. Was we had a special effects, what we call cage, where we kept all our stuff in. And not every day, but quite a few days, you get Don Mancini and all the grown-ups, as we call them, turn up to see what effects were going to be done for the next day, you know, the producers and everything. So there was this one scene where someone has to get stabbed, funnily enough, and we ended up, I made a Sony blood station, I called it. It had 4 buttons, so it was like trickle, you know, cut, arterial, and I can't remember what the next one, but it was, you know, just devastating. Anyway, So I could do these sort of, you know, different effects with just by pressing these buttons.
Amazing.
But I was watching this arterial blood come out, and they're all stood there, you know, doing this thing, and unknown to me, I saw that the first went, you know, can you make it a bit stronger like that? And Jason walloped the pressure right up, and as I pressed the button, this whole thing went bang like that and covered Don Mancini in blood. And he had that one of those shocking moments where everyone just went, "Oh my," you know, and the whole place went silent. And I started laughing because he was completely covered from head to toe in blood. And I think he actually started to laugh himself. He said, "Actually, you're right." He said, "I can't make a Chucky film without getting covered in blood. So, you know, it's appropriate."
Exactly.
Luckily, I dodged that bullet and got on with it. But
they didn't dodge the bullet, so this is the thing.
But it was a very fun, weird film to do because I seem to remember it had Hannah Spiro, and I can't remember who the other chap's name was. Anyway, it was. I had to do a full body burn on her. I've never done a body burn before at that time, and that was my first body burn. And obviously the stunt woman. So we go through it, and Tiffany, you know, the other doll.
Oh yeah, Tiffany.
Chucky's wife, Tiffany, sprays her with hairspray and sets a light to her, you know, and she has to go fall backwards over a banister and then falls straight down and dies, you know, a floor down on the floor on fire.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I was actually sort of, you know, I was quite sort of, quite wary of setting anybody alight. But the whole secret to that is you stay calm, you stay professional. You we all have a laugh, but I think with us, it's special effects particularly. I think you put your game head on, and it all gets it's proper, it's serious. You can all have a laugh afterwards, but when you're doing it, it's game head on.
But I think as well, there's a lot of misconceptions about, you know, special effects and what it represents, because a lot of people think it's either visual effects or special effects, and then also people think there's a lot of CGI, computer generated imaging, that is happening. You're sitting behind a computer all day creating all of these things. Can you explain a wee bit?
No, I think yeah. What we're doing is extremely dangerous, and it's as controlled as it can be. That's the thing, you know. It's controlled as it can be, but it's you know, you potentially can kill that person, and you've got to stay very calm, very collective, very sort of focused. Rehearse, then you go for it. And then I'm not kidding, it's the same, you know, it used to be the same sort of feelings as when we, you know, when the train left the station at the National Theatre. There's a massive adrenaline rush, and you like, oh my God, you know, it's going to happen. Here it goes, bang, you know, and then it's all the safety procedures afterwards. And then once they're okay and they put their thumbs up and everyone's happy, and you know, you breathe a big sigh of relief, and the rest of it's easy after that. Yeah. But you know, you've got to think things through. It's like, what are the potentials to go wrong? What could go wrong? What could happen? How am I going to behave if it does? I mean, I did one where I had to grab 2 stuntmen, because when you're watching these things happen in real life, your brain is going about 20 times faster than actual real time. So you've got to time it. And this gag was one where he drives into a wall and explodes, and the whole car's on fire. And 5 seconds later, then you go out and put him out. Yeah. And we're there, I'm watching it, it's gone bang. And literally in my head, I go, Mississippi 1, Mississippi 2, Mississippi 3, Mississippi 4, Mississippi 5, now go, you know, that's it. But by the time I'd done Mississippi 1, two of the stunties next to me, of course, started to run forward to try and put him out, because in their heads, your brain is just, oh my God, because you've just witnessed this thing of a car hitting a wall, bursting the flames, and your mate's in there. So, there's it's hard. It's really difficult, So I had to literally hold these two guys, and I'm counting at the same time. And I go, now you can go. But luckily, they realised what they'd done, and they didn't go into shot, and everything was fine. But that sort of thing can ruin the shot.
That could have been a different ending. That really could have been a different ending. And that's the thing. It's so high powered, high drama, high intensity, and it's just again people don't really recognize that side of things, and that's what wants me to lead on to discuss the Game of Thrones, because obviously you had a big part to play in that, and won a couple of Emmys, I think, as well. Would that be about right?
Well, we've got I think those of us who've been there long enough, we've got now 10 Emmy honours. Yeah, so that's quite cool. Yeah, double figures.
It is. It's amazing, and then the last ones have just been released out as well, which is good.
What, the Emmys? Yeah. I've just sent young Jack to. Yeah, so that's cool.
That's right, because that's how because my partner Jack is obviously was working with you on the Game of Thrones, and that's how we met him. The last time I saw you was you were showing me how to cook a very particular type of Indian curry.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Thrones has been a bit of a weird one, really, because obviously it's been 8 years of your life. I did a job safe house in South Africa, and I met a nice chap, Nigel Wilkinson, who I'm friends with, and on the way back, he said to me, when we were travelling first or business class, which is very nice, with both our feet up, having just had a bit of a relax after a very intensive film, and then he said, "Oh, I like the way you work, blah blah blah. Would you, I've just done the first series of Game of Thrones. Would you fancy coming on board?" I went, "Yeah, right." So what? I didn't think anything of it, and I ended up on Thrones. I was expecting to go on to World War Z. Mm-hmm. That did come off, but funnily enough, I got the call for it on the first day I started on Game of Thrones, and so I was very sorry. I'm busy.
Otherwise preoccupied. It's funny how the synchronicity of things happen, though.
I know. It's very odd. So, I started off, and it was very small. There was only about half a dozen of us.
Half a dozen of you special effectors.
Yeah. Obviously, we had the floor crew, but the workshop crew was very, very small. It was like there was Albert, who was an old Belfastarian who'd spent, funnily enough, his whole career at the actual Titanic studios, building the ships, welding them up, and he was an old boy, and he is, or was, I don't know whether he's still alive now, bless him, a poet laureate, and just a fantastic bloke. And he looks like a bruiser. He's like, really sort of strong Belfast accent, and he smokes like a trooper. But he'd come up to you and he'd recite one of his poems, and you go, "Oh, bloody, that's just incredible." And I feel very privileged. He actually gave me one of his books that he had.
Maybe try and get him on the podcast.
I don't know whether he's still alive, bless him. He had a lot of problems with his lungs. And he used to tell funny stories about being in this pit welding up, and they used to get a break every 15 minutes from welding, and they go and sit at the top of the pit and have a cigarette. So he must have completely damaged himself, over the years. But there was myself, Albert, Nigel, and I can't remember the other chap's name, and a couple of trainees. And basically, it was very small. It was just tiny little thing, and we were doing little things like making retractable, all the stuff that I used to do on the National Theatre, retractable daggers, retractable swords, flaming swords. You know, I didn't make flaming swords at National, but it led on to all that sort of development.
I was talking to Sam Conway about that. You know, the special effects supervisor. He was saying that you know, there was very little needed in special effects at the very beginning, really.
Oh, it wasn't. It was just little trick stuff. It was very sort of, you know, it was gas stuff. There's a lot of fires. You know, there's always been a lot of fires on thrones. And then the dragons started to come in.
Yes, and that's what I want to get on to, because obviously, it took on a world of its own, and your job became almost, you know, the focus because of all the special effects coming in, and it was so important. Your job was so important, and I can remember you telling me the story about your experience with the dragon and the flames coming out of the dragon, and I'm sure whoever is watching and listening to this who absolutely adores the Game of Thrones, they're going to have to hear this story.
Well, I started when the dragon was a baby, so
right.
we literally started making these little flame effects. So they were very tiny, they're very small. But then the brief was that it had to go 60 feet, pencil straight, and have an 8-foot flame at the end of it. And then that really starts getting your head around things, because you've got to find things that will cope with those kind of pressures. You've got to find nozzles that will fire those kind of distances and keep up the look that they want. And eventually I actually thought that because the dragon each year for the first 3 years, anyway, from season 2 right the way through to season 5, it was getting bigger each time. And by season 4 or 5, I was thinking, actually, you know what, this thing's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So I've got to think a bit outside the box and make it a bit more juicy, if you want to a better word.
Definitely one more so you could put it.
Yeah, it was quite funny. We had these Halion fire suppression system bottles that were rattling around outside, and I thought, oh, I could use those. So I had to ratchet strap them to the metalwork bench outside, which the rack, and I let these things off. 3 of them, two of them. Sorry, there was 3. 2 of them I let off. I was able to crack them and just let them off nice and gently. The 3rd one, there was no way it was going to be let off nice and gently, and I'm very pleased I actually strapped this thing properly to the bench, and everyone come running out because the noise was just incredible. So I've got these 3 bottles now, and I was able to make them into hugely high pressure vessels, which health and safety wise they wouldn't touch they wouldn't make them certificated, if that makes sense. Yeah. So, and I'm used to those sort of things in special effects. So we basically hired the same equipment that they use, and we tested this to destruction, these bottles, and they were fine. They were absolutely fine. So we knew we could chuck in as much as we needed pressure-wise, and I could throw that thing as far as they wanted it to go. And so the whole system was so small, light, and portable. Obviously, it went to Asuna, it went to Croatia, it went all over the place, you know, and we'd set it up and operate it. And it was. I have to say, there is one story in Asuna where I think we did 17 body burns, you know, full body burns, and we set this thing up on a techno crane, which is £1 million worth of equipment, and with my $5.99 flamethrower on the front of it. But I'm joking, but I set this thing up, and I knew it had to go on to these sort of things. So I made it as light as possible and just had umbilical cords to it so I could keep the weight down.
And was
And
this season 8, Larry?
sorry?
Was this season 8?
No, this wasn't season 8. This was, I think, season 6. I think it's season 6.
Okay.
But with the Unsullied, I think is it the no, not the Unsullied. Oh, anyway, whoever wear those stupid gold masks, I can't remember now. But we're in a sauna in an arena, and I've got this thing, and it's on the techno crane, and it's pointing at a group of guys that are just going to get torched. You know, they've all been gelled up. You know, Sam and his guys and Jack and everybody have all gelled them up already. And you think that you have this thing where you're sat in this arena. I'm just trying to put you there. There's 500 odd extras. They're all sitting there. There's this group of guys that are all gelled up, ready to go. We've gone hot. So the flamethrower has got its burners set, and it's roaring away, ready to go. And everything just before we go goes deadly silent, and I'm on the kill switch. I'm the person that at the first responder, because it's all computer operated. I'm the first responder to make sure that anything, if it goes wrong, I can switch this damn thing off quick stick.
No pressure.
And I'm on a stool and I'm looking around. There's like God knows how many crew. There's probably about 70, 100 crew there. And everything goes deathly silent. So I get this moment where I look around and go, how the hell how on earth did I get to this point?
Wow.
And then and 3, 2, and it's game head on, and boff, we do it, and it's perfect, and it's fine. And the rest of the day is absolutely fine. So it's just one of those things, you know, where you have that sort of career.
Exactly. And you know, it's funny because I hear a lot of the stories as well, like from different people involved.
Yeah.
Like I love the dragon story. I love the embalming stories. I love the fire and the excitement of it all. I just think it's fascinating. I mean, I wasn't really into Game of Thrones overly at the start, and then obviously I got into it in a very big way as time went on. And then what else? I mean, if you were to say there was one thing that you worked on that was the one thing in your career that made you say, this is why I'm doing it, is it that, or is it anything else in particular?
I think there's a few times where I've gone, oh my God, this is the nuts. I'm getting paid for this. But the season 8 was industrial. It wasn't like anything I'd ever worked on, scale-wise, time after time after time after time again. So I ended up project managing a lot of the big projects. So there was a massive 200-meter fire trench that went round Winterfell.
You dug the trench, like you got that trench, Jack. You and Jack and they all got down and got that trench dug. Yeah,
and so I ended up. I had to design it. We had to get that okayed. Then I had to go there with. We were actually using ground workers as well to help us. You know, that's how industrial it was. So every day I'd have to drive up with 3 or 4 of us to Toome, and we'd set this thing up. And I made, I think, 15 trays, and they were massive. And we filled those with water and had the gas bars in those because it gave a nice even feel. And it was like the canal system. Everything had to be set level and go the whole way around Winterfell, and it was fed from a massive ring main, which then Caligas, we had to put a proper concrete block in for the Caligas to put their system on and all the rest of it. It was just ginormous, and I thought that was big. I mean, we had I had 5 lorry loads. This will give you an idea of scale. 5 lorry loads of steel, This is
Wow.
18-wheeler lorry of just steel tubing ranging from sort of 2-inch right up to 6-inch. Each of those had to be cut. They all had to be bent. They all had to be made into spikes. They all had to be drilled. They all had to be fixed together. They all had to be put in these trenches once once a gas trench had been made. Then they had to be physically dressed in. It was a mental job, and we had everything against us. It was all winter. It was just, you go in and your heart would sink because you can't dig in the ground because it's frozen solid.
Oh,
No matter, it didn't matter that you had a £40,000 digger; it wouldn't touch the floor. It just scrape across the top of the
oh
surface.
no,
Like,
I know.
oh, and then to add insult to injury, they brought filming forward. So I'm told that it's okay. I can carry on. I can do, and I'm up against it big time. And we've got down the bottom there doing the filming. And I end up with this situation where the ADs are coming up and they're stopping you every 5 minutes. We're turning over. You've got to stop. You've got to stop. And I get so frustrated with this, but it's quite a funny story. And this guy, eventually I'm getting proper pissed off. And the guy one of the ADs puts his head over this berm of soil, and I'm in the trench. And I just look at him before he has anything to say. I said, right, before you say anything, I put my finger, before you say anything, I am not stopping for you, the director, the producer. And if you've got a problem with that, I said, get them down here now, like this. And he said, can I have a bag of sand, please? So completely knocked the wind out of my sails. I went,
Oh my goodness.
yeah, all right, get my bag of sand, So, I mean,
Oh,
a ton of sand, but it was hilarious,
oh,
But
Larry.
it was massively industrial, and I thought that was a big project. And every section, there was 5 sections of this trench that you could turn on and off, and it was just massively, Then we had to prep for the funeral pyres, and that was just mental as well. So the whole thing had to be filled in, used all the rig main to.
Big glass, reinforced glass, wasn't there?
That's right. That was just for the close-ups. That was, yeah. So these massive funeral pyres were made. So that was all a huge, huge job. Then I had a trebuchet, which was fallen to bits and collapsed and on fire. That's where the Khaleesi and Jorah have their last stand against the army of the dead. Then I moved on then. As soon as that was all sort of finished, I was able to move on to the next project, which was King's Landing. And if I thought that was small, this was horrendous. So we've got 2 lots of industrial size gas systems, one either side of the street. It's a whole street. There's loads and loads of windows, doors, everything to be on fire. Everything has to be cookability. And the worst thing for me was the set was built. We were talking to I feel for the construction guys, because I was talking to them saying, you've got to have a minimum of 2 layers of fireboard where we're going to go in the windows and stuff. And that's all got to be sealed up. And we've gone through all the sealants, and we've gone through all the bits and pieces. But the temperatures that we were reaching were something around about 1,300 degrees. It was just ridiculous. I mean, it was just huge. We've made massive fireboxes to go in the back of the windows and doors, and all out of steel, and they bolt through. And there was over 5 miles of just gas hose to be put
5
in.
miles.
Over 5 miles of gas hose. Yeah. It was ginormous, this job. Absolutely ginormous.
And for anyone who's listening and watching here, this is obviously when there's an attack on the
King's Landing.
So people will remember that there was this big trench belt that they were trying to get over. That's that
right.
The wall, and it's because it's just so, it was such an intense, dark, intimate, fiery scene. And
Yeah.
all the work, I mean, you're only telling us literally one minute facet of
But
something.
it was all done in 3 stages. They literally built a bit of Dubrovnik there, and it was beautiful. I mean, it was an absolute masterclass in plasterwork. It was just stunning work. And the first part of it was obviously was pristine. It was absolutely, it has to be as if it should be, you know, without any damage whatsoever. Then you start getting the bit where the dragons attacking was starting to get damage, and then we had a 2-week window where we had buildings that were designed literally to be broken and taken in half and brought down and stuff like that. And they would be originally gassed up buildings, so we'd have to de-rig all those and get them taken down. Mm-hmm. They were able to be, again, on fire, but they were no longer the building that you recognised. And it was just a massive job. And if you think about during the day, I had a gang of probably 20 firemen that I'd go through the safety briefing with them in the morning about what we're doing, and I kept those guys busy. Those guys were the boxes behind the windows and doors were so hot, they were red hot, they were glowing. That's how hot the whole thing. So we were getting a few outbreaks into the main, set work, and they were busy. They were putting those out as they were filming. I said, my mandate is to keep those doors, windows burning when they need them, and then they were going at full pelt. And they had to keep control of all those buildings that were on fire. Anything that was, extraneous, they were putting out behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. And they were quite, bless them, they were a little bit disorganised to start off with, and then they got it. The penny dropped, and I managed to get them so that they were a good, coordinated bunch of guys, and I think they really enjoyed themselves because they were doing what they're paid to do, constantly firefighting, and they loved it. They absolutely loved it.
I know it's that kind of thing where literally, I'm so fascinated by all the different things that you have to say. The stories, we could talk all day long. One thing I do want to ask is, do you miss Belfast?
I do. I do actually. Yeah. It's the right answer. Actually. I mean, I've been, living in Belfast on and off for 8 years. And I think when I first went there, I was, you've been fed a diet of, what can I say? A diet of rubbish in terms of the way the British think of Northern Ireland. And I have found, quite honestly, that the Irish people are the most friendly. If you broke an Irishman in half, he'd have music written through him like rock, because they've got that culture of music, talking. I don't think I ever come across an angry Irishman. Not in the whole time I was there. They love a good crack. They love a good story, and I think they're hugely friendly, and I would quite happily live there.
But it's so funny how we were neighbours, because we ended up that we found out later that we lived right. 5 doors from each other. That was so funny. And I know Belfast is a small place, but that's ridiculous.
That is small, yeah.
And regarding, you're in Essex now, you're not in Belfast.
I'm in deepest, darkest Essex, yeah.
Darkest Essex. And tell us a bit about what you're working on at the moment, if anything, there.
I've just finished on The Nevers, which is another HBO job, and I've been thinking about a little project that I've been sort of toying with for the last 2 or 3 years, actually. So I'm getting a set of products together that I am going to then present. I've already shown the company that I've talked to about it, and they were quite dubious at first, and now they seem quite excited about it. So that's quite cool.
We'll find out. Watch this space, yes.
Watch this space, yeah. So again, it's sort of I've been putting stuff together over the last few years from my man cave, which is things like CNCs and various, so it's nice. So I'm able to use all the stuff I use in my workshop, and use it for myself. So it's fantastic.
So
yeah.
Lockdown with the COVID-19 coronavirus.
Well,
has it affected you?
It's sort of really odd because it hasn't affected me pretty much at all, apart from the shopping part of things. I think a lot of people in our industry are quite used to having time in between work, because they're quite used to it's feast or famine.
Yeah.
But I do feel very sorry for a lot of people in this country, including people in the film industry, that aren't paid a great deal of money. The production's just up sticks and go, and leaving them fairly, quite a few places high and dry. And we all know that. We all sort of experience that. And it's hard for them to survive. It's hard for a lot of people. They can barely think past 2 or 3 weeks, never mind, maybe months in advance. So I can imagine this is going to cause a lot of untold hardship. I don't care about, I know you've got all the furlough and all the rest of it, and there are probably quite a few people that are able to get their 80% or whatever the case may be. But there's a whole swathe of people that are not going to be benefited by that.
Well, I think it's like 5 million have fallen through the cracks.
There you go. And I'm one of those 5 million. I read an email, I think yesterday, about people like ourselves, just, you ain't eligible. And I have issues with that because, like everybody else, I pay my tax.
Exactly, you've massively contributed, to.
And this country is contributed to the tune of, I don't know how many billion. Is it something like 5 billion a year in the film industry?
Wow, I didn't realise that.
Oh my! I think it's bigger than, as big as the banks. It's huge. It's just huge, And we're always the poor cousins. The arts and entertainment are always the poor cousins, and they're seen as the poor cousins. But
and it's funny because
what would you do without us?
Well, exactly. I mean, Netflix has watched more in the last month than it's ever been watched.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think when things are going up, when things are better, I think because we've got this unprecedented time of Netflix, Amazon Prime, you've got Apple TV, you've got HBO, you've got Warner Brothers, you've got all the main studios. The film industry, I don't think, and television industry has never been so busy, ever. And I think anybody who comes into the industry or starts in this industry now has probably got quite a rosy future for the next 4 or 5 years, work-wise, that is.
Yeah,
but
that's a positive note.
Yeah, I mean, there are times where things have gone awry. I've been very lucky in my career that I've managed in the dip times to be working abroad on action films, or I have had other sources of income from back in my old life of, English National Opera and places like that, So I've been very lucky. Yeah,
well, it's good in the sense that you've been so diverse and you've done so many different things. I think it's fantastic, and fair play. I mean, this podcast is called In Search of Purpose, but I think that you've definitely so far in your life led a very purposeful existence, Larry. And
there's an old saying which I think quite a few people have picked up on, but I always say it's the price I pay for a life less ordinary.
It is, and it's definitely a life less ordinary, but very purposeful nonetheless. And I really thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. And I'm going to go away and watch all the movies that you've talked about in a completely different light. I'm going to be looking out for those 1,980 windows. Oh no, that was the stairs in Harry Potter. Sorry.
3,500.
3,500 in the Batman Begins. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Listen, thanks a million, and
Yeah.
hopefully we'll talk again soon, because we could do a whole other podcast again on all the other stories that we haven't got to cover. So that's great. Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Thanks, Sal.